The scream cut through the morning quiet of Mama Rosa's diner like a blade through silk. Sharp, terrified, impossible to ignore. It bounced off the chrome napkin dispensers, ricocheted across the worn laminate tables, and died somewhere near the coffee station where Bryn Holloway stood frozen, her hands wrapped around a pot that had gone cold 5 minutes ago. But the little girl who screamed heard none of it. Not the clatter of dropped forks, not the concerned murmurs from the trucker in booth 3, not even the sound of her own voice tearing through the air. For 8 years, Maisie Brennan had lived in absolute silence. And for 8 years, her father had watched her suffer through moments exactly like this one, helpless, despite every dollar spent, every specialist consulted, every desperate prayer whispered into the darkness of too many sleepless nights. Bryn set down the coffee pot with hands that trembled just slightly. She'd been counting, always counting. 71 seconds, 72, 73. The episode would end right about now. It always did, like clockwork, like a pattern written in pain that only Bryn seemed to see. Across the diner, Garrett Brennan caught his daughter as she stumbled forward, her small hands clutching at the left side of her head. His weathered face twisted with that particular kind of agony that comes from loving someone you can't protect. The kind of pain that settles into your bones and makes a home there permanent as scars. His hands scarred from combat in motorcycle engines and the hard work of building something from nothing moved with practiced gentleness as he signed to her. "Baby, I'm here. Daddy's got you." But Maisie couldn't see his hands. Her eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaming down her 8-year-old cheeks, her whole body trembling with pain that came from somewhere deep inside her ear. Somewhere the doctors couldn't reach. Somewhere 26 specialists had looked and found nothing wrong. Nothing to fix, nothing to do but accept and adapt and learn to live with suffering. Bryn watched from behind the counter, her fingers unconsciously tracing the edge of the small notebook she kept in her apron pocket. The notebook her mother had taught her to carry. The notebook that held 8 months of observations, 47 episodes documented, with the kind of detail that medical school had once praised before telling her she lacked clinical judgment. Before her mother died, proving that observation mattered more than credentials. The episode ended at 74 seconds. Maisie's hands slowly dropped from her head, her breathing steadied. Her father held her close, his massive frame wrapped around her small one like he could shield her from the pain if he just held on tight enough. They both knew better. This was supposed to be a good day. One of those rare Saturday mornings when the club business could wait, when Garrett could take his daughter out for pancakes at their favorite spot, when they could pretend for an hour that life was normal. That Maisie was just another 8-year-old girl who liked her pancakes with too much syrup and her bacon extra crispy. That silence and pain weren't constants in her world. But pain doesn't care about plans. It arrives on its own schedule, following patterns only the desperate bother to track. Bryn moved without thinking, her body responding to instincts she'd spent 2 years trying to silence. She crossed the diner floor with the cleaning rag still in her hand, approaching booth 7, where Garrett had positioned himself between his daughter and the rest of the world. His eyes tracked her movement, cold, assessing. The eyes of a man who'd led men through combat in the Gulf, who'd built the Steel Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, from anger and purpose, who knew how to read threats before they materialized. "Mr. Brennan," Bryn kept her voice soft, positioning herself where Maisie could see her lips if she looked up. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Garrett's jaw tightened. His arm stayed wrapped around Maisie's shoulders, protective, immovable. "We're fine, thank you." The dismissal was clear, but Bryn had spent 8 months watching this moment replay itself every few weeks. 8 months counting seconds, measuring angles, documenting what no one else seemed to notice. 8 months fighting the voice in her head that sounded like her mother that said, "When you see something, you say something, even when it terrifies you." "I know Maisie is deaf," Bryn said quietly. "Everyone knows that. But Mr. Brennan, I've noticed something else. Something about her pain." Garrett's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You've noticed." His voice carried the weight of 8 years of people noticing, people commenting, people offering unsolicited opinions about his daughter's condition like they had any right. "You're a waitress, not a doctor." "I know." Bryn's hands tightened on the cleaning rag. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This could go very wrong. Garrett Brennan was 6'3", 240 pounds of leather and muscle and protective father instinct. The Steel Brotherhood wasn't a club you approached lightly, especially about the president's daughter. But Bryn had watched Maisie suffer through too many breakfasts. She'd seen the little girl's face contort in pain too many times. And there was something, a pattern she'd been tracking for months that she couldn't ignore any longer. But I've been watching, Bryn continued, not in a creepy way, just observing, and Maisie's pain is always in her left ear. Always that specific side. And there's a way she tilts her head, a specific angle that makes me think there might be something doctors missed. The words hung in the air between them. Dangerous words. Words that implied failure on the part of 26 trained professionals. Words that suggested a waitress might see what specialists couldn't. Garrett stared at her. His hand, the one not holding his daughter, rested on the table. Bryn could see the scars across his knuckles, the faded tattoos that spoke of military service and harder years. She could see the war happening behind his eyes. The desperate hope of a father who tried everything versus the protective instinct that told him not to trust strangers with his daughter's well-being. 26 specialists have looked in her ears, Garrett said finally. His voice was flat, final. 26 trained doctors with expensive equipment and fancy degrees. You think they all missed something? Bryn met his gaze. This was the moment where she either helped or made everything infinitely worse. Yes, she said simply, I do. The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, consequences building. Garrett's jaw clenched. His hands tightened slightly on Maisie's shoulders. Bryn could practically see the calculations running through his mind. The years of disappointment. The fortune spent chasing cures that never materialized. The weight of being a single father trying to navigate a medical system that kept telling him nothing could be done. Maisie had been watching Bryn's lips throughout the exchange, reading the conversation with the expert skills she'd developed by age 5. Now her small hand tugged on her father's leather vest. When he looked down, she signed something quick and deliberate, her fingers forming shapes Bryn had learned to recognize over months of Saturday mornings. She says the pain is really bad today. Garrett translated, his voice rough. Worse than usual. Bryn nodded. She'd noticed. The episode had lasted 74 seconds, this time 4 seconds longer than average. The pattern was shifting, escalating. Whatever was wrong, it was getting worse. Mr. Brennan, I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to let me look. Just look. If I'm wrong, you never have to speak to me again. But if I'm right, if there's even a chance I'm right, don't you owe it to Maisie to check. Garrett looked down at his daughter, at her tear-stained face, at the way she was still pressing fingers against her left ear like she could push the pain away through sheer will. He thought about the 8 years of pain, 8 years of silence, 26 specialists who'd all said the same thing, nothing to be done, cause unknown prognosis unchangeable. 8 years of feeling helpless while his daughter suffered. What exactly are you proposing? He asked finally. Bryn pulled out her phone, opened the flashlight app. Her hands were steadier, now moving with purpose. I want to look in her ear with proper light and magnification. If I see what I think I'm going to see, it would require careful extraction. Very careful, but Mr. Brennan, I need you to understand something first. She paused, making sure he was listening, making sure he understood the full weight of what she was offering. I'm not a doctor. I assisted once with my nephew who had a bead lodged in his ear canal for 3 months. Doctors kept missing it because it had worked its way deep and it was camouflaged. I spotted it by accident using a flashlight to make shadow puppets. That's my entire medical credential. A phone flashlight and luck. That's not exactly reassuring, Garrett said. No, Bryn agreed, but neither is a degree if it keeps missing what's actually wrong. And the truth of that statement settled over both of them. Garrett studied Bryn's face, looking for something. Sincerity, maybe? Or desperation that matched his own. Whatever he saw there made him shift slightly, made him sign to Maisie that the nice waitress wanted to look in her ear, that it might help that he'd be right there the whole time. Maisie nodded without hesitation. 8 years of pain had taught her to trust her father absolutely. If he said it was okay, it was okay. One look, Garrett said. You get one look. If you see something, we talk about next steps. If you see nothing, you walk away and we never speak of this again. Deal. Deal. But even as she agreed, Bryn felt the weight of what she was attempting, the responsibility of it, the terror of being wrong. She knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to Maisie's eye level. The little girl watched her with dark eyes that had learned to compensate for the loss of one sense by sharpening all the others. She smiled at Bryn, a small, brave smile that made Bryn's chest tighten. Bryn activated her phone's flashlight and adjusted the angle. She'd done this before with her nephew Tyler. She remembered the methodology, the patience required, the way you had to tilt the light just right to see past the natural shadows of the ear canal. At first, she saw nothing unusual. The normal curves of the ear canal, the healthy pink of tissue, the natural shadows that made examination difficult without professional equipment. But Bryn adjusted her angle slightly, tilting her head just as Maisie always tilted hers. 47 degrees to the left, the exact angle the little girl unconsciously adopted when the pain started. And suddenly the light caught something. Deep in the canal, nearly at the eardrum, was a mass. Dark, compact, but with an unusual texture that made Bryn's breath catch in her throat. Not earwax, not entirely. There was something else there. Something foreign wrapped in layers of wax that had accumulated over years of the body trying to isolate and protect against an invader. "Mr. Brennan," Bryn said carefully, "I need you to look at this." She handed him the phone, positioning it at the exact angle she'd found. Garrett looked, his expression shifting from skepticism to focused intensity. He saw it too, that dark mass that shouldn't be there. "What is that?" he breathed. "I think," Bryn said slowly, "it's a foreign object that's been there for years. Probably since Maisie was a toddler. Maybe a small bead, maybe a piece of foam, something she pushed in when she was too young to know better. It's gotten covered in wax over time, compacted against the eardrum, blocking sound transmission and causing pressure and pain." Garrett pulled back from the phone. His face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. His hands, those scarred and capable hands, were trembling slightly. "Every doctor looked," he said. His voice sounded hollow, distant. "Every single one. They looked for standard blockages," Bryn explained gently. "Standard wax buildup. But this is deep, it's camouflaged, and it requires the exact right angle of light to see. I only spotted it because I've been watching Maisie tilt her head the same way for months, and I finally understood why. She's instinctively positioning her ear at the angle where the pressure feels slightly less." Garrett sat back against the booth. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at his daughter, at his hands, at the phone that had revealed what hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical equipment had missed. "Can you remove it?" he asked finally. This was the dangerous part, the moment where Bryn either helped or made everything catastrophically worse. "I believe I can," she said carefully. "But Mr. Brennan, this is delicate. If I do it wrong, if I push it deeper or damage the eardrum, I could make things worse. We should really go to an ENT specialist right now with this information." "No," the word was flat, final, brooking no argument. "When Maisie has an episode like this, the pain subsides after an hour or two. By the time we get to a specialist, make an appointment, get seen, it'll be days. And you said it yourself. They've all missed it, every single one. But my daughter has lived in pain and silence for 8 years because trained professionals missed what a waitress spotted in 5 minutes." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The armor he wore, the toughness required to lead a motorcycle club and survive combat and raise a deaf daughter alone, that all of it cracked just enough to show the desperate father underneath. "If you think you can help her," Garrett said, and now his voice was raw, stripped of everything but need. "If you believe you can do this safely, then I'm asking you to try. Please, I'm asking you to help my little girl." The please shattered something in Bryn's chest. This man, this president of a motorcycle club who probably hadn't said please to anyone in years, was asking her for help, trusting her when she barely trusted herself. Bryn looked at Maisie, who had been watching this entire exchange through tears and pain, reading lips, understanding that this stranger was offering something nobody else had offered in 8 years: hope. The little girl nodded once, a tiny gesture of trust that carried enormous weight. "Okay," Bryn said, "I need a few things: tweezers with rubber tips, clean water, good light, and everyone to be very, very still." What Bryn didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that her hands were shaking, that her heart was racing, that every instinct screamed this was too much responsibility, too much risk, too much everything. But she thought about her mother, about Corinne Holloway, who'd logged symptoms in a notebook that doctors never bothered to read, who'd died because people with degrees dismissed what a woman without credentials observed. Bryn wouldn't be that person, wouldn't be the one who saw something wrong and stayed silent because she lacked permission to speak. She stood up and walked to where Mama Rose was watching from behind the counter. The diner owner was 60-something with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. She'd been watching the scene at Booth 7 with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what was happening. "Rose, I need the first aid kit. The good one with the sterilized tweezers." Mama Rose didn't ask questions. She just reached under the counter and pulled out a white metal box that looked like it had been maintained with military precision. She handed it to Bryn, then did something unexpected. She gripped Bryn's wrist hard enough to make the younger woman meet her eyes. "My daughter had something similar," Rose said quietly. "Took 8 doctors over 14 months to find it. By then she'd lost 40% of her hearing permanently. If you see it now, you remove it now. Don't wait for permission, that'll come too late." The words hit Bryn like a benediction and a warning all at once. Rose released her wrist, and Bryn returned to Booth 7 with the first aid kit and a determination that felt like armor. The next 15 minutes unfolded with the strange elasticity of time under pressure. Minutes that felt like hours. Seconds that stretched into small eternities. Garrett positioned Maisie on the booth bench, lying on her right side with her left ear facing upward. Another waitress, Sarah, held Bryn's phone, angling the light exactly as instructed. Knox Sterling, the Steel Brotherhood's vice president, had arrived at some point, alerted by Garrett's text. He stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with the wary attention of a man who'd learned to expect the worst and prepare accordingly. Bryn sanitized the rubber-tipped tweezers 3 times. She washed her hands until they were red. She positioned herself carefully, her world narrowing to the small circle of light, the dark mass deep in Maisie's ear canal, and the careful progression of metal toward target. She could feel Garrett's eyes boring into her, could sense his entire body coiled tight, ready to pull his daughter away at the first sign of trouble. Maisie lay perfectly still, her small hand clutching her father's, her eyes squeezed shut. Bryn inserted the tweezers, slowly following the ear canal's natural curve. The mass was deep, nearly at the eardrum, and reaching it required absolute precision. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning. Her world narrowed further. Just light, just target, just the steady progress of metal through flesh, toward the thing that had stolen 8 years of a little girl's hearing. She felt the tweezers make contact, felt the resistance of years-old compacted material. Bryn adjusted her grip, found purchase on the edge of the mass, and began to pull. Slowly. So slowly it barely registered as movement, working the object loose from where it had been lodged for 8 years, easing it past the curves and contours of the ear canal. Maisie whimpered once. Bryn froze immediately. Waited. Made sure she hadn't caused damage. Made sure the whimper was discomfort, not pain. Made sure she could continue. Garrett's grip on his daughter tightened, but he didn't interfere. Didn't pull Bryn away. He trusted her. That trust was terrifying. Bryn continued. The object was moving now, sliding through the canal, bringing with it layers of accumulated wax and debris. She could see it emerging, centimeter by centimeter, coming into the light, and then after what felt like hours but was actually 90 seconds, it came free. Bryn held it up to the light, and for a moment nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. They all just stared at what had been hidden for 8 years. A foam earplug, military-grade olive drab green. The kind soldiers used to protect their hearing during combat. The kind Garrett Brennan probably still had in his nightstand from his Gulf War days. Completely encased in darkened wax. About the size of a pea, but dense enough to block an entire ear canal pressed against an 8-year-old's eardrum, preventing sound transmission and causing chronic pain for nearly a decade. "That's it," Bryn breathed. "That was blocking everything." But she barely got the words out before Maisie's entire body went rigid. The little girl's eyes flew open wide with shock. Her hands shot to both ears, pressing against them as if to confirm they were real. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a long moment. Just shock. Pure, absolute shock, as her brain began processing sounds it had never experienced before. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the clink of dishes being washed, the murmur of conversation from booth 3, where the trucker sat mesmerized. The traffic outside on the street, the rustle of clothing, the sound of breathing, of heartbeats, of existence itself. Maisie's face transformed. Confusion, first her eyes darting around as if trying to locate something invisible. Then wonder. Absolute wonder. The kind of expression that only appears on a face experiencing miracle. "Daddy," she whispered, and the words shaped by years of speech therapy but never heard came out perfect and clear and absolutely beautiful. Garrett made a sound somewhere between a tone and a laugh. He pulled Maisie into his arms, holding her so tightly Bryn worried he might hurt her. But Maisie didn't complain. She was crying and laughing simultaneously, overwhelmed by the sensory explosion of a world suddenly alive with sound. "I can hear," Maisie said louder now, testing her own voice, hearing the vibration and the volume and the reality of it. "Daddy, I can hear you, I can hear me, I can hear everything." Her hands moved to her throat, feeling the vibration there, making the connection between movement and sound for the first time in her conscious memory. She laughed, and the sound of her own laughter made her laugh harder, a feedback loop of joy and disbelief, an overwhelming sensation. Garrett looked up at Bryn, and the expression on his face was something Bryn would remember for the rest of her life. Gratitude beyond words. Relief so profound it had broken through decades of carefully constructed emotional armor. This man, this president of a motorcycle club who'd probably face violence and loss and hardship that would destroy most people, was crying openly in a diner booth because a waitress had given his daughter the world. "How do I thank you?" Garrett asked, his voice shaking. "How do I possibly thank you for this?" Bryn shook her head. Her own eyes were wet. Her hands were still trembling from adrenaline and terror and the crushing weight of what had just happened. "You don't," she said. "You just love her. That's enough." But even as she said it, Bryn knew it wasn't enough. Not for Garrett Brennan, not for the Steel Brotherhood, not for a man who'd just watched a stranger give his daughter a miracle. Knox Sterling stepped forward, his weathered face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. He looked at Bryn with an expression that held respect and gratitude, and something that looked like awe. "You just changed everything," he said quietly. "You know that, right? Everything just changed." Bryn didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet, but she would learn in the weeks and months that followed exactly what it meant to help the Steel Brotherhood's president. Exactly what it meant to earn the loyalty of men who valued actions over words, observation over credentials, courage over comfort. But in that moment, standing in Mama Rose's diner with a foam earplug coated in 8 years of wax and suffering, Bryn just felt exhausted and vindicated and terrified of what came next. She thought about her mother, about Corinne Holloway's notebook book filled with observations that doctors dismissed, about the promise Bryn had made at her mother's bedside. When you see something, you say something, even when you're terrified, even when you're not warned, even when the whole world tells you to trust credentials over instincts. Maisie was still discovering towns. She clapped her hands together just to hear the sound. She hummed, then squealed at hearing her own voice. She made Garrett say her name over and over just to hear how it sounded in his voice. Every sensation was new. Every sound was a revelation. And Bryn realized something fundamental in that moment, something that would shape everything that came after. She'd been right, not lucky, not accidentally correct. She'd observed, documented, trusted her eyes, and been right. After 2 years of self-doubt and guilt and wondering if dropping out of medical school meant she'd wasted her gift, she'd finally proven something she'd been too afraid to believe. She could see what others missed, and that mattered more than any degree. Mama Rose approached the booth with her phone out, and Bryn realized the older woman had been recording the entire extraction. The whole thing, from the first insertion of tweezers to Maisie's first words. "You'll want documentation," Rose said to Garrett, "for the doctors, for the insurance, for everyone who said nothing could be done." Garrett took the phone, but his eyes stayed on Bryn. "I owe you," he said. "The Steel Brotherhood owes you, and we pay our debts." "I don't want to—" "Not about what you want," Garrett interrupted gently. "It's about what's right. You gave us everything. We'll figure out how to say thank you properly. But right now, I need you to know something." He stood up, still holding Maisie, who was babbling about how different everything sounded, how loud the world was, how she could hear the coffee machine and the door chime, and her own footsteps. 26 specialists looked at my daughter, Garrett said. Specialists with degrees from fancy schools and decades of experience. They all missed what you saw. Every single one. You know what that tells me? Bryn shook her head. Tells me the system's broken. Tells me credentials don't mean shit if you're not actually looking. Tells me that observation matters more than degrees. And tells me you're exactly the kind of person who should be in medicine, not out of it. The words hit Bryn like a physical force. For 2 years, she'd believed she didn't belong in medicine. That dropping out meant she'd failed. That her mother's death proved she couldn't trust her own observations. And here was this man, this father who'd spent 8 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars searching for answers, telling her she was exactly where she belonged. "I'm just a waitress," Bryn said. "No," Knox Sterling said from behind Garrett. "You're someone who sees. That's rarer than any medical degree. And it's exactly what the world needs more of." The words settled over Bryn like a mantle, heavy with responsibility and possibility. She thought about her mother's notebook still in her apron pocket, about the promise she'd made, about the 2 years she'd spent hiding behind a coffee pot because she was too afraid to trust herself. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to finish what her mother started. Maybe it was time to believe that observation mattered more than credentials, that seeing was a skill as valuable as any medical degree, and that speaking up when you noticed something wrong wasn't presumptuous. It was necessary. Maisie pulled away from her father long enough to look at Bryn directly. The little girl's face was radiant with joy and wonder. She spoke carefully, testing each word, hearing it for the first time. "Thank you," Maisie said. "Thank you for seeing me." And that was when Bryn started crying. Not from stress or fear or relief, though all of those were present. She cried because she finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her, what Corinne Holloway had known all along. Seeing people, really seeing them, was the most important thing you could do. More important than tests or scans or credentials. Because sometimes what people needed most wasn't someone with the right degree. Sometimes they just needed someone who would really look at them, who would trust their own eyes, who would speak up when they saw something wrong. Sometimes they just needed someone who would see them. Bryn looked at the foam earplug in her hand. Such a small thing, such an ordinary object. And yet it had stolen 8 years from a little girl's life, had caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses, had broken a father's heart over and over again. All because 26 specialists looked but didn't see. She thought about all the other children who might be suffering right now. All the other families told that nothing could be done. All the other patterns that went unnoticed because people trusted equipment over observation, credentials over instincts, systems over individual attention. How many others were out there? How many Maisies suffered because no one bothered to really watch, to really document, to really see the question lodged in Bryn's mind, like the earplug had lodged in Maisie's ear? Present, persistent, impossible to ignore. And just like that, everything changed. Not just for Maisie, who would spend the next hours discovering sounds she'd never known existed. Not just for Garrett, who would finally sleep without the weight of helplessness crushing his chest. But for Bryn, too. Because sometimes you don't find your purpose. Sometimes it finds you in a diner booth on a Saturday morning when a little girl's scream cuts through the quiet and you realize you've been counting seconds your entire life just so you could be ready for this one moment. The moment when seeing something and saying something makes all the difference. The moment when a waitress with a phone flashlight proves that observation matters more than degrees. The moment when everything changes because someone finally bothered to really look. The silence that followed Maisie's first words wasn't really silence at all. The diner hummed with the ambient noise of Saturday morning dish clattering in the kitchen, the hiss of the coffee machine, the low murmur of conversations from other booths. But for Bryn Holloway, standing in the center of booth 7 with a foam earplug still clutched in her trembling hand, the world had narrowed to a single sound. Maisie Brennan was laughing, not the silent laughter of a deaf child who'd learned to express joy without hearing it. This was full-throated, amazed, overwhelming laughter, the kind that came from a soul discovering something it never knew it was missing. She kept touching her throat, feeling the vibrations, then touching her ears, making the connection between sensation and sound for the first time in her conscious memory. "It's so loud." Maisie said her words slightly imperfect but clear enough. Everything is so loud. Is it always this loud? Garrett Brennan pressed his forehead against his daughter's, his massive shoulders shaking. Bryn had never seen a man that size cry so openly. It was like watching a mountain crack apart, revealing something vulnerable and human underneath all that leather and scar tissue and carefully constructed armor. Yeah, baby, Garrett managed. It's always this loud. You've just been missing it. I can hear you breathing, Maisie said, wonder saturating every word. I can hear my own breathing. I can hear. She stopped, tilted her head. What's that sound, that humming? That's the refrigerator in the kitchen, Bryn said softly. Maisie's eyes went wide. She looked at Bryn like she'd just revealed the secrets of the universe. Everything makes sound, the little girl breathed. Everything. Knox Sterling, the Steel Brotherhood's vice president, stood near the booth with his phone out, recording everything. Tears tracked down his weathered face into his gray beard, and he made no effort to hide them. Behind him, 3 more Steel Brotherhood members had arrived, drawn by Knox's rapid-fire texts. They stood in a loose semicircle, these hardened men who'd probably seen violence and darkness that would destroy most people, and they watched an 8-year-old girl discover sound with expressions of pure wonder. Bryn needed to sit down. Her legs felt like water, her hands still shaking with residual adrenaline. She'd just performed a medical procedure, unauthorized, unqualified, completely outside any professional scope in a diner booth. If something had gone wrong, if she damaged Maisie's eardrum, or pushed the object deeper, or caused an infection, she could have faced lawsuits, criminal charges, the destruction of any hope she had of returning to medicine. But she hadn't gone wrong, she'd been right. And that realization was almost as terrifying as the procedure itself. Mama Rose appeared at Bryn's elbow with a glass of water and a hand on her shoulder that felt like an anchor. Breathe, Rose said quietly. You did good. Now breathe before you pass out. Bryn took the water with hands that spilled a little over the rim. She drank, and the cold shocked her system back into some semblance of normal function. Around her, the diner had gone completely still. Every patron watched booth 7. The trucker in booth 3 had tears on his face. The elderly couple by the window held hands across the table, watching a miracle unfold over pancakes and coffee. Sarah, the other waitress who'd held the phone for light, touched Bryn's arm gently. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she whispered. The bravest or the craziest? Maybe both. Maybe both, probably both. Bryn had just bet everything on her observation skills, her pattern recognition, her belief that what she saw mattered more than what 26 specialists had missed. And she'd won. But the weight of that victory felt heavier than she'd expected. Garrett finally looked up from his daughter. His eyes found Bryn's across the booth, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. We need to talk, he said, about what happens next. What happens next? The question Bryn hadn't let herself consider while she was focused on the immediate problem. But now the immediate problem was solved, and the future stretched out in front of them like unknown territory. Maisie needs to see a real doctor, Bryn said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. An ENT specialist. Today, if possible. We need to make sure there's no damage, no infection, no complications from the removal. Agreed, Garrett said. He shifted Maisie slightly, signing to her, even though she could hear him now. Old habits. Baby, I need you to sit with Uncle Knox for a minute while I talk to Miss Bryn. Okay. Maisie nodded, though she looked reluctant to leave her father's arms. Knox stepped forward and lifted her easily, settling her on his hip like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Probably had. The Steel Brotherhood took care of their own, and the president's daughter was everyone's niece. Let's go find out what the door chime sounds like, Knox said to Maisie, carrying her toward the front of the diner. And maybe the sound the bell makes when we ring for service. Garrett slid out of the booth and gestured for Bryn to sit. She did, her legs grateful for the support. He sat across from her, and this close, Bryn could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The man probably hadn't slept well in 8 years. Tell me about your nephew, Garrett said. The one with the bead. You said doctors missed it for 3 months. Bryn nodded. She'd been expecting this question, had been preparing for it since she first approached the booth. My nephew Tyler, he was 5. Kept complaining about his ear hurting, but 3 different pediatricians looked and said it was just wax buildup. Prescribed drops. Nothing helped. My sister was going crazy with worry. She paused, remembering. The memory still carried weight. I was visiting one weekend playing with Tyler. I had my phone out making shadow puppets on the wall to make him laugh. The light hit his ear at just the right angle, and I saw something. A little bead bright blue deep in his ear canal. It had worked its way down over time, and the wax had started coating it. At a normal examination angle, it looked like nothing. But at 47 degrees with the light just right, you could see the blue underneath. 47 degrees, Garrett repeated. Same angle, Maisie tilts her head. Yes, that's what made me look closer. I've been watching her tilt her head the same way for months. Always the same angle, always the left side. It's not random. It's instinctive. Her body was trying to relieve pressure by positioning her ear canal at the angle where the blockage caused the least discomfort. Garrett was quiet for a moment processing this. His hands rested on the table, those scarred and capable hands that had held his daughter through 8 years of suffering. You've been watching my daughter for months, he said finally. Not an accusation, just a statement. Yes, I'm sorry if that sounds... Don't apologize. Garrett's voice was firm. You were doing what 26 specialists didn't do. You were actually paying attention. So tell me, what else have you noticed? Bryn reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her notebook, the small, spiral-bound book her mother had taught her to carry. The one that had been Bryn's constant companion through pre-med, through her mother's illness, through the 2 years since she dropped out. She opened it to the pages dedicated to Maisie Brennan. I started documenting 8 months ago, Bryn said, sliding the notebook across the table. When you first became regulars here, I noticed the pattern immediately. Episodes every 3 to 4 weeks, always the left ear, pain lasting between 68 and 76 seconds with an average of 73, always accompanied by that specific head tilt. The episodes seemed to correlate with barometric pressure changes. They were more frequent before storms. Garrett stared at the pages. Bryn had filled them with detailed observations. Dates, times, duration of episodes, environmental factors, Maisie's exact positioning, diagrams showing the angle of her head tilt, everything documented with the precision of someone trained to observe, even if the medical establishment had decided she lacked clinical judgment. This is, Garrett's voice caught. He cleared his throat. This is exactly like my notebook. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn leather journal. Opened it. The pages were filled with similar documentation. 8 years of observations. Every episode logged. Every detail recorded. The desperate documentation of a father who knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. They told me it was psychological, Garrett said, his voice hard with old anger. That deaf children sometimes experience phantom pain as a psychological response to their disability. That I was projecting my own trauma onto my daughter's condition. One doctor suggested I was making it worse by being overprotective. He looked up at Bryn and the pain in his eyes was raw. I knew they were wrong. I knew it. But who was I? Just a biker with a high school diploma in combat trauma. They had the degrees, they had the equipment, they had the authority, and I was just a father who wouldn't accept that his daughter had to live in pain forever. You weren't wrong, Bryn said quietly. Your observations were perfect. You saw the pattern, you documented it. The problem wasn't you. The problem was a system that values credentials over observation, that trusts equipment over human attention, that dismisses what doesn't fit into expected parameters. Garrett's jaw clenched. He flipped through more pages of his notebook, and Bryn saw 8 years of anguish written in cramped handwriting. Hospital visits, specialist consultations, test results, all leading to the same conclusion: nothing to be done. $340,000, Garrett said. That's what I spent trying to fix my daughter. Sold my house, mortgaged the garage, took out loans. The club helped with some of it, their family, but most of it was on me. $340,000, and none of it helped because every single doctor was looking in the wrong place. The number hit Bryn like a punch. $340,000. A fortune, a life savings, all wasted because specialists looked but didn't see. I'm sorry, Bryn said. The words felt inadequate. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Garrett closed his notebook with careful precision. Be angry, be furious, because this isn't just about Maisie. This is about every kid suffering right now because doctors are too proud to admit they might miss something. Every family going bankrupt chasing cures that don't address the actual problem. Every person dismissed because they don't have the right credentials to be taken seriously. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. You were right, Bryn. And you know what that means? It means somewhere out there right now, there's another Maisie suffering. Another family being told nothing can be done. Another pattern going unnoticed because the system is broken. The weight of his words settled over Bryn like a physical thing. She'd been so focused on this one girl, this one problem, that she hadn't fully considered the implications. If 26 specialists could miss something this obvious, how many others were being missed right now? What are you suggesting? Bryn asked, though she thought she knew. I'm suggesting you stop being a waitress, Garrett said bluntly. I'm suggesting you finish what you started. Go back to school, get your degree. But don't let them train the observation out of you. Don't let them convince you that credentials matter more than actually seeing people. I have $47,000 in student loan debt, Bryn said. I dropped out to take care of my mother, and when she died, I couldn't afford to go back. I'm barely making rent working here. Going back to school isn't an option. It is now, Garrett said. The Steel Brotherhood is paying off your debt. All of it. Bryn's breath caught. What? No, I can't. Not asking permission. Garrett's tone brooked no argument. You gave my daughter her hearing. You gave me my daughter's voice. You think money means anything compared to that. The club votes on major expenses, and I'm calling an emergency vote tonight. But I already know how it'll go. Every single member will vote yes. You're family now, Bryn. And we take care of family. I don't want charity. This isn't charity. This is investment. You've got a gift, a real gift for seeing what others miss. The world needs that. Medicine needs that. And I'll be damned if you waste it serving coffee because you can't afford tuition. Bryn's eyes burned. She couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. $47,000, and the crushing weight she'd carried for 2 years. The reason she'd given up on her dreams, just gone. Why, she managed. Why would you do this? Garrett's expression softened slightly. He glanced toward the front of the diner where Knox was helping Maisie identify different sounds. The little girl's face was radiant with discovery. My wife died 6 years ago, Garrett said quietly. Isabel, she had breast cancer. Stage 3 when they finally found it. But she'd been complaining about symptoms for 8 months before that. Fatigue, pain, a lump she could feel. 3 different doctors told her it was stress, age, hormonal changes. By the time someone actually took her seriously enough to order a mammogram, it was too late. He met Bryn's eyes and she saw the grief there, still raw after 6 years. Isabel died because doctors didn't listen, because her observations about her own body were dismissed, because the system failed her just like it failed Maisie. So when I say you need to finish your degree, I'm not just talking about my daughter. I'm talking about my wife. I'm talking about every person the system fails because people stop observing and start just checking boxes on a form. Bryn thought about her own mother, about Corin Holloway's notebook filled with observations that 3 doctors dismissed as hypochondria, about the yellow tint in her mother's eyes that Bryn had logged but not trusted, about how people with degrees told them both that they were wrong, and by the time anyone took them seriously, it was too late. My mother died the same way, Bryn said. Ovarian cancer, misdiagnosed as IBS stress menopause. She kept telling them something was wrong. I kept logging her symptoms, but we both trusted their credentials over our observations. She died 3 months after they finally found it. Garrett's expression shifted. Recognition, shared pain, shared understanding of what it meant to lose someone because the system valued credentials over actual observation. Then you know, he said, you know what it's like to watch someone die because nobody bothered to really look, to really listen, to trust what they were seeing over what their training told them to expect. Yes, Bryn whispered. I know. Then don't let it happen again. Garrett's voice was steel-wrapped in compassion. Don't let your mother's death be meaningless. Don't let Isabel's death be meaningless. Go back to school, get your degree, but be the kind of doctor who actually sees people, who trusts observation over assumption, Who doesn't dismiss what doesn't fit the expected pattern? The enormity of what he was asking settled over Bryn, not just asking, demanding, requiring. He was giving her the means to return to medicine, but with it came the responsibility to be better than the system that had failed both their families. I don't know if I can, Bryn admitted. Medical school broke me the first time. They told me I had good technical skills but poor clinical judgment, that I saw patterns that weren't there, that I needed to trust established protocols over personal observation. My mother died while I was trying to unlearn everything she taught me about watching people. They were wrong, Garrett said. Your clinical judgment is perfect. They just didn't like that it contradicted their assumptions. The system doesn't want observers. It wants people who follow protocols, who check boxes, who don't question established conclusions. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. But here's what I learned in combat, Bryn. Sometimes the person with the most education is the one who gets everyone killed, because they trust their training over what's actually happening in front of them. The soldiers who survived weren't the ones who followed the manual. They were the ones who trusted their eyes and their instincts and their observations over what they'd been taught to expect. The comparison should have felt forced, combat versus medicine, but it didn't, because both required the same fundamental skill, seeing what was actually there instead of what you expected to see. What if I fail again, Bryn asked. What if I go back and they break me again, and I waste everything you're offering and then you fail, Garrett said simply, but you fail knowing you tried, knowing you didn't let fear keep you from using your gift. And Bryn, I don't think you'll fail. I think you'll terrify them. Because you're what they should be and aren't. You're someone who actually sees people. Maisie's laughter cut through the diner. She'd discovered the sound of the door chime and was making Knox open and close the door repeatedly, delighted by the consistent ding-ding-ding. Other patrons smiled, watching her joy. She has perfect hearing, Garrett said, watching his daughter. The ear that was blocked. 8 years of silence, and now it's like it never happened. Do you understand what that means? It means if you'd come along 8 years ago, if someone like you had been observing instead of just testing, my daughter would have never lost those years. She'd have grown up hearing her mother's voice. Isabel would have heard Maisie say, "I love you," before she died. His voice cracked on the last sentence. The magnitude of what had been lost. What could have been prevented if someone had just bothered to look properly? I can't change the past, Garrett continued. Can't bring back Isabel. Can't give Maisie those 8 years. But you can change the future for other kids, other families, other people suffering because the system fails them. That's a lot of pressure, Bryn said. Yeah, Garrett agreed. It is, but pressure makes diamonds, and you're already harder than you think. Knox returned with Maisie, who immediately launched into an excited explanation of all the sounds she'd discovered. The door chime, the coffee grinder, the sound of footsteps on different surfaces, the way Knox's keys jangled in his pocket. Everything was new. Everything was miraculous. Garrett pulled his daughter into his lap, and Bryn watched the two of them together. Father and daughter, both transformed by what had happened, both discovering a world that had expanded beyond what they'd thought possible. I need to call a specialist, Garrett said. Get Maisie examined properly. Make sure there's no damage. But first I need your help with something. Anything, Bryn said and meant it. Garrett pulled out his phone and opened the camera. I need you to show me exactly what you saw, he said. The angle, the lighting, the technique. I need documentation, because when we go to that specialist, they're going to ask how a waitress saw what they missed. And I want to show them exactly why observation matters more than credentials. For the next 20 minutes, Bryn walked Garrett through her methodology, the angle of light, the positioning, the way she'd tilted her head to match Maisie's natural tilt, the patience required to see past the normal shadows and wax build up to the foreign object beneath. Garrett filmed everything, asked questions, took notes. He was building a case, documentation that would force the medical establishment to confront its failure. This is going to embarrass some very important doctors, Knox observed, watching the documentation process. Good, Garrett said flatly. They should be embarrassed. Maybe embarrassment will make them look harder next time. By noon, the diner had returned to something resembling normal operation. The breakfast crowd had dispersed, taking with them the story of what they'd witnessed. By evening, it would be all over Austin's motorcycle community. By tomorrow, it would spread further. The Steel Brotherhood president's daughter could hear. A waitress had done what 26 specialists couldn't. The system had failed and an outsider had proven it. Bryn was exhausted. The adrenaline crash had left her shaky and hollow. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Something that felt like purpose. Like the universe had aligned in a way that demanded she pay attention. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. When you see something, you say something. Even when you're terrified. Even when you're not sure. Even when the whole world tells you to trust credentials over instincts. Corinne Holloway had died because people with credentials didn't trust her observations. But maybe her death didn't have to be meaningless. Maybe it could be the foundation for something better. A legacy built on the radical idea that observation mattered more than assumptions. Garrett stood to leave Maisie held close. The little girl was starting to look tired, overwhelmed by 8 hours of sensory input compressed into a few hours. Her father signed to her old habits, and she nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're going to Dr. Sloan Whitmore," Garrett said to Bryn. "She's the ENT specialist at Austin Medical Center. Best in the city, supposedly. We'll see if she's humble enough to learn from her failure." "Let me know how it goes," Bryn said. "I'll do better than that," Garrett replied. "I'll bring her here, tomorrow. She needs to meet you, needs to understand what she missed and why, needs to learn how to actually see patients instead of just examining them." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, handed it to Bryn. "That's my cell. You call me if you need anything. Day or night, you're family now. That means something in the Steel Brotherhood. It means you're protected. It means you're valued. It means we've got your back always." Bryn took the card, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she managed, "for trusting me, for letting me help." "Thank you," Garrett corrected, "for having the courage to speak up when you saw something wrong. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed quiet, afraid of being wrong, afraid of overstepping. You didn't, and that changed everything." He shifted Maisie slightly, then met Bryn's eyes one more time. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow your life changes. The Steel Brotherhood votes on your debt at church tonight. By morning you'll be free to go back to school, to finish what your mother started, to become what the medical system needs but doesn't deserve." They left Garrett and Maisie and Knox walking out into the afternoon sun. Bryn watched them go, these people who'd been strangers this morning and were family now. She thought about the foam earplugs still sitting in an evidence bag that Knox had provided. Such a small thing, such enormous consequences. Mama Rose appeared at Bryn's side, watching the Steel Brotherhood members drive away on motorcycles that rumbled like thunder. "You know your life just changed forever, right?" Rose said. "Yeah," Bryn said. "I know. Are you ready for it?" Bryn thought about her mother, about 8 years of watching a little girl suffer, about 2 years of hiding behind a coffee pot, afraid to trust herself, about the moment she'd finally spoken up despite her fear. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think that matters. I saw something, I said something, and now I have to follow through." "Good," Rose said, "because the world needs more people willing to speak up, needs more observers, needs more people who trust their eyes over what they're told to see." Bryn pulled out her mother's notebook, opened it to a fresh page, started documenting what had happened today. Every detail, every observation, every moment of the procedure. Because this was just the beginning. The first case. The first time she'd trusted herself and been proven right. But it wouldn't be the last. Somewhere out there right now, another child was suffering. Another family was being told nothing could be done. Another pattern was going unnoticed because the system valued credentials over observation. And Bryn Holloway was going to change that. One observation at a time. One voice raised when others stayed silent. One waiters who refused to accept that seeing wasn't enough. Who insisted that speaking up mattered. Who proved that sometimes the most important medical skill wasn't found in textbooks or learned in lecture halls. Sometimes it was just the courage to trust your own eyes. The text message came at 7:43 on Sunday morning, jarring Bryn awake from the first decent sleep she'd had in 48 hours. Debt cleared. $47,000. Vote was unanimous. Welcome to the family, Garrett. Bryn stared at her phone screen, reading the words over and over until they stopped feeling like a hallucination. $47,000. The weight that had crushed her for 2 years. The reason she'd abandoned her dreams. The constant presence in the back of her mind making every purchase feel like a failure, every shift at the diner feel like penance. Gone. She sat up in bed, her small apartment suddenly feeling different. The cracked ceiling she'd grown accustomed to, the secondhand furniture, the stack of medical textbooks she'd kept out of stubborn hope and self-punishment. All of it looked different now, like artifacts from a life that was ending so a new one could begin. Her phone rang. Dr. Sloan Whitmore's office, according to the caller ID. Miss Holloway, a professional voice female, carefully neutral. This is Dr. Whitmore's office at Austin Medical Center. The doctor would like to see you this afternoon at 2 o'clock if you're available, regarding the Maisie Brennan case. Bryn's heart hammered. I'll be there. Excellent. Dr. Whitmore asked me to inform you that this is a professional consultation, not a disciplinary matter. She wants to discuss your observational methodology and examine the documentation of yesterday's procedure. Translation: a specialist wanted to understand how a waitress had succeeded where she'd failed. The conversation would either be humble curiosity or defensive hostility. Bryn wouldn't know which until she walked into that office. I'll bring everything, Bryn said. My documentation, the object I removed, photos and video from the procedure. Perfect. We'll see you at 2. Bryn spent the morning organizing her materials, her notebook with 8 months of observations, the foam earplug in its evidence bag, the photos on her phone showing the exact angle of light required to spot the blockage, Mama Rose's video of the extraction. She arranged everything with the precision of someone preparing for a defense because that's what this was. A defense of observation over credentials, of pattern recognition over protocol, of seeing over assuming. At 1:30, she dressed in the only professional clothes she owned, black slacks and a white blouse she'd bought for medical school interviews 4 years ago. They still fit barely. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone who didn't quite belong in either world. Not waitress enough for the diner, not credentialed enough for medicine. Caught between that identities, trying to figure out which one she was becoming. Her mother's voice, memory soft but firm. You're not becoming anything, Bryn. You're revealing what was always there. Austin Medical Center occupied a gleaming glass building in the downtown medical district. Bryn had been here before, during her mother's final months. The building still smelled the same antiseptic and coffee and that particular scent of institutional anxiety. She checked in at the front desk, was given a visitor badge, and directed to the 7th floor ENT department. Dr. Sloan Whitmore's office was exactly what Bryn expected. Diplomas on the wall, medical journals on the desk, photos of successful procedures and grateful patients, the visual language of credibility and expertise. Dr. Whitmore herself was in her early 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back and sharp eyes that assessed Bryn from behind rimless glasses. Miss Holloway, thank you for coming. Dr. Whitmore gestured to a chair. I won't waste your time with pleasantries. I examined Maisie Brennan last night. Her left ear canal shows signs of chronic irritation consistent with long-term foreign object impaction, but no damage to the eardrum. No infection, no complications from the extraction. Her hearing in that ear is incredibly perfect. She paused and Bryn saw the war happening behind her professional mask. You did in 5 minutes what I failed to do in 3 separate examinations over 4 years. So before we go any further, I need to say something. I'm sorry, I failed that child, I failed her father, and I need to understand how I missed what you saw. The apology hit Bryn harder than hostility would have. She'd prepared for defensiveness, for credentials being used as weapons for the system protecting itself. She hadn't prepared for humility. You didn't miss it because you're a bad doctor, Bryn said carefully. You missed it because you were looking for what you expected to find. Standard wax buildup, standard blockage. You weren't looking for something that shouldn't be there, hidden at an unusual depth, camouflaged by years of accumulated material. Show me, Dr. Whitmore said. Show me exactly what you saw and how you saw it. For the next hour, Bryn walked Dr. Whitmore through her methodology. She explained the 8 months of observation, the documentation of pain patterns, the correlation with Maisie's head tilt angle, the connection she'd made to her nephew's case, the specific lighting angle required to see past the wax to the foreign object beneath. Dr. Whitmore listened with the focus of someone genuinely trying to learn. She took notes, asked questions. Examined the foam earplug with something like horror in her eyes. 8 years, Dr. Whitmore said quietly. This was there for 8 years, since she was an infant, and I looked at it 3 times and saw nothing. You looked at it with the right equipment, but the wrong angle, Bryn said. And more importantly, you didn't have the context. You didn't know about the consistent pain pattern, the specific head tilt, the way the episodes correlated with pressure changes. You saw her once every 6 months for 15 minutes. I saw her every Saturday for 8 months. Different time frames, different data sets. You're suggesting long-term observation matters more than specialized examination. I'm suggesting they both matter, Bryn corrected. But we've built a system that values 15-minute appointments with specialists over long-term attention from people who actually see patients regularly. We've decided that credentials matter more than observation, and children like Maisie suffer because of it. Dr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up a file. I have 11 current patients with unexplained hearing issues, she said. Children who've been through every test, every scan, every standard protocol. Nothing found. I assume. Nothing to treat. Families told to accept and adapt. After yesterday, I'm wondering how many of them have something I've missed because I was looking for the expected instead of the actual. She turned the laptop toward Bryn. Would you be willing to observe them? Not examine, not treat, just observe. Document patterns. Apply your methodology. Help me see what I'm missing. Bryn's breath caught. This wasn't what she'd expected. This was an offer of partnership, of validation, of the medical establishment admitting that maybe, just maybe, observation mattered as much as credentials. I'm not a doctor, Bryn said. I'm not even a medical student anymore. I have no legal standing to participate in patient care. You'd be a consultant, Dr. Whitmore said. Paid position. You observe, document, report patterns to me. I examine based on your observations. We work together. Your eyes, my credentials. What you see, I can act on. Why Bryn asked. Why would you do this? It undermines your authority, makes you look like you need help from someone without qualifications. Because I do need help, Dr. Whitmore said bluntly. Because I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, and yesterday I learned that I've been looking but not seeing. Because if I missed one foreign object, I've probably missed others. And because my pride matters less than helping children who are suffering. She leaned forward, her expression intense. The medical system is broken, Miss Holloway. We've optimized for efficiency over attention. We've valued credentials over observation. We've built a structure that rewards quick diagnoses and standard protocols while punishing people who take time to really see patients. Yesterday, you proved that system wrong, and I'd rather be part of fixing it than defending it. Bryn thought about her mother, about Corinne Holloway's notebook full of observations that doctors dismissed, about the promise Bryn had made at her mother's bedside, about the 2 years she'd spent hiding because she was too afraid to trust herself. I want to go back to school, Bryn said. The Steel Brotherhood paid off my debt. I'm going to finish my nursing degree, specialize in pediatric care. Your offer is generous, but I need to get my credentials if I'm going to change the system from inside. Then work with me part-time, Dr. Whitmore said. Observation doesn't require 40 hours a week. It requires attention and pattern recognition. Work your shifts at the diner, go to school, and spend 5 to 10 hours a week observing my difficult cases. You get paid. You get real clinical experience to add to your resume. And children get the benefit of your gift while you're earning the credentials to use it officially. It was a perfect offer. Too perfect. Bryn's instinct was to find the catch, the hidden cost, the way it would fall apart. But maybe not everything had to be complicated. Maybe sometimes people genuinely wanted to help. Maybe the system could change one humble doctor at a time. Okay, Bryn said. I'll do it. Dr. Whitmore smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. Good, because I've already scheduled the first case for Thursday. 6-year-old boy named Tucker Malone. Unexplained hearing loss in the right ear for 2 years. Parents have spent $80,000 on specialists. No one's found anything. But I'm betting someone who actually watches might see what we've all missed. They shook hands, and Bryn felt the weight of new responsibility settling onto her shoulders. Not crushing, not overwhelming, just present, real. A reminder that seeing came with obligations. The next 3 months unfolded with the strange elasticity of major life transitions. Time moved simultaneously too fast and too slow, cramming transformation into weeks that felt like years, while individual days blurred together in exhaustion and purpose. Bryn enrolled in an accelerated nursing program at Austin Community College. Her transcripts from her previous medical school work transferred, putting her ahead in several courses. She worked 3 shifts a week at Mama Rose's diner, and she spent every Thursday and Saturday observing Dr. Whitmore's difficult cases. Tucker Malone was first. Bryn watched him for 30 minutes in the waiting room before his appointment. He scratched his right ear every 22 minutes. Always the same spot, always the same motion. His mother attributed it to habit, but Bryn saw pattern. During the examination with specific angle lighting, Bryn spotted a tiny pebble lodged in an unusual position in his ear canal. The pebble had been there so long it had become coated in wax, mimicking nerve damage on standard tests. Dr. Whitmore removed it under controlled conditions. Tucker heard his mother say, "I love you," for the first time in his conscious memory. His mother cried. Dr. Whitmore cried. And Bryn added another case to her growing documentation. Delaney Foster was second, 7 years old, diagnosed with functional hearing loss, psychological, not physical. But Bryn noticed Delaney only had episodes under fluorescent lighting. Further testing revealed photosensitive seizures causing temporary auditory processing disruption, not hearing loss at all. Different treatment entirely. Delaney's psychological problem turned out to be neurological and completely treatable. Kieran Hughes was third, 5 years old, 18 months of unexplained ear pain. Bryn observed that Kieran pulled his left ear only after eating. Food allergy testing revealed severe reaction to dairy causing eustachian tube inflammation. Dietary changes. Pain gone within 2 weeks. Simple. Obvious in retrospect. Missed because no one connected eating to ear pain. 3 children in 3 months. 3 families told nothing could be done. 3 problems solved through observation over assumption, attention over protocol, seeing over expecting. The medical community took notice. Dr. Whitmore presented their collaborative methodology at a regional pediatric conference. The response was mixed, half fascination, half hostility. Some doctors wanted to learn. Others felt threatened. The idea that observation might matter as much as credentials challenged the foundation of medical hierarchy. But the families knew. The families whose children had been helped spread the word. And soon Dr. Whitmore's office was flooded with requests. Dozens of families with unexplained conditions, all hoping someone would finally really look. They couldn't take everyone. Dr. Whitmore had other responsibilities. Bryn had school and work. But they took what they could. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. Not a replacement for traditional medicine. A complement to it. A reminder that observation mattered. The Steele Brotherhood stayed close. Garrett checked in weekly, sharing Maisie's progress. The little girl was thriving. Her speech improved daily as she learned to modulate volume and tone. She joined the school choir and discovered a passion for music. Every sound was still miraculous to her. Every song was a gift. 6 months after the diner extraction, Garrett invited Bryn to Steele Brotherhood Church, the club's weekly meeting. She'd never been to a motorcycle club gathering before and arrived nervous, uncertain what to expect. The clubhouse was exactly what she'd imagined, and nothing like it. Leather and chrome and the smell of motor oil and coffee, but also photos of families, memorial walls for fallen brothers, donation boxes for local charities. These were dangerous men who'd seen violence and loss. But they were also fathers and uncles and brothers who protected what they loved. Garrett called the meeting to order. 43 members present, ranging from their 20s to their 70s. They went through standard club business rides, fundraisers, territory concerns. Then Garrett stood. "We got one more piece of business tonight," he said. "6 months ago, a waitress gave my daughter her hearing back, gave me my daughter's voice, proved that observation matters more than credentials and courage matters more than qualifications." He gestured to Bryn, standing nervously near the wall. "Bryn Holloway has used what we gave her to help 3 more kids in the past months. 3 more families who were told nothing could be done. She's going back to school to get her credentials so she can help more. And I want to make sure she knows she's protected while she does it." He pulled out a leather vest, Steele Brotherhood colors, and handed it to Bryn. "This makes you honorary family," Garrett said. You don't have to wear it if you don't want to, but it means if anyone gives you trouble, they're giving us trouble. It means you're protected. It means you're valued. It means you're one of ours. Bryn took the vest with shaking hands. On the back was a custom patch, a pair of eyes above the words, "She who sees." "I don't know what to say," Bryn managed. "Don't say anything," Knox Sterling said from across the room. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep seeing what others miss. Keep speaking up when something's wrong. That's all we ask." The club erupted in applause, these hardened men showing appreciation the only way they knew how. Loud, unashamed, absolute. Bryn wore the vest home that night and hung it carefully in her closet. She didn't wear it publicly, didn't want to appropriate an identity she hadn't earned through the years of brotherhood. But knowing it was there, knowing she had that protection and support made everything feel more possible. School was hard, harder than she'd expected. Not the coursework that came easily, but the culture, the emphasis on protocols over observation, the way professors dismissed pattern recognition that couldn't be quantified, the subtle and not so subtle messages that intuition was unreliable, that seeing was less valuable than testing that observation was a soft skill beneath the dignity of real medicine. But Bryn had 3 children's case files, had video documentation of problems she'd spotted that specialists missed, had Dr. Whitmore's professional validation. So when a professor told her she relied too heavily on subjective observation, she presented Tucker Malone's case. When another suggested her pattern recognition was unscientific, she showed Delaney Foster's results. When they implied her methodology lacked rigor, she presented 8 months of documentation on Maisie Brennan that matched Garrett's independent logs exactly. Slowly, reluctantly, the program adapted to her, created space for her methodology, started asking other students to incorporate observation protocols into their practice. One professor even asked her to guest lecture on pattern recognition in pediatric diagnostics. The system was changing, slowly, grudgingly, but changing. 18 months after the diner extraction, Bryn completed her nursing degree with honors. Her thesis, Observational Methodology in Pediatric Auditory Diagnostics, What We Miss When We Stop Watching, was published in 3 medical journals. Medical schools across Texas began incorporating observation training into their curricula. Not because they wanted to, because Bryn and Dr. Whitmore had proven it was necessary. The ripple effect expanded. Whitmore partnered with the Steele Brotherhood to create the Second Listen Clinic, a mobile unit that offered free secondary examinations for children with unexplained diagnoses. They traveled to rural areas underserved by specialists, offered observation-based assessments, found problems that standard 15-minute appointments missed. In 2 years, the Second Listen program identified and helped 89 children across 12 states. Not all ear problems. Some had vision issues misdiagnosed as learning disabilities. Some had pain from undetected injuries. Some had behavioral problems that were actually neurological. But all of them had been told nothing could be done. All of them had been dismissed. And all of them were helped because someone finally bothered to really look. The Morrison Chen Foundation, Garrett had insisted on naming it after his late wife Isabel, and Bryn's mother, Corinne, provided funding. The Steele Brotherhood organized charity rides that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Other motorcycle clubs joined in spreading the model across the country. Observers mattered. Attention mattered. Seeing people mattered. And through it all, Bryn kept her mother's notebook in her pocket, kept documenting, kept observing, kept trusting her eyes even when the world told her credentials mattered more. 4 years after the diner extraction, Bryn stood backstage at Austin Youth Orchestra's spring concert. She was 29 now, board-certified pediatric nurse, specializing in ENT care. She worked part-time at Dr. Whitmore's practice, now called the Whitmore Holloway Clinic, and part-time at the Second Listen mobile unit. She still picked up occasional shifts at Mama Rose's diner because Rose had given her a chance when no one else would, and loyalty mattered. Tonight was special. Maisie Brennan, now 12 years old, was performing her first original composition. The girl who'd spent 8 years in silence had discovered that music wasn't just sound. It was emotion translated into frequency. She'd taught herself piano, then violin, then composition. And tonight she was sharing what she'd created. The auditorium was packed. 200 Steele Brotherhood members in formal vest cuts filled the first 10 rows. Behind them, families from the Second Listen program. parents holding children who'd been helped, medical professionals who'd learned to observe, journalists covering the story of the waitress who'd revolutionized diagnostics by trusting her eyes. Garrett sat in the front row, Knox beside him. Both men wore their colors proudly. Both had tears already forming because they knew what this performance meant. Proof that miracles weren't complicated. Proof that observation mattered. Proof that speaking up when you saw something wrong could change everything. Maisie walked onto the stage with her violin poised and confident. 12 years old, but carrying herself with the grace of someone who'd learned that suffering could be transformed into strength. This piece is called "The Woman Who Heard My Silence." Maisie announced, her voice clear and perfect and impossible not to marvel at. It's dedicated to Bryn Holloway, who saw what no one else saw, who trusted herself when the world told her not to, who gave me the gift of sound and taught me that observation is the most important skill in medicine. She positioned her violin and began to play. The piece started soft, haunting. The musical representation of silence, not empty, but full of unheard things. Yearning and pain translated into melody. It built slowly, adding layers, complexity emerging from simplicity, and then at the midpoint, a sudden shift. Brightness, clarity, sound exploding into the silence like light into darkness. The moment of transformation. The moment everything changed. Bryn stood backstage with tears streaming down her face. She thought about her mother, about Bryn Holloway's notebook that had started this journey, about the promise she'd made to trust her eyes, about the 2 years she'd spent hiding behind a coffee pot, afraid to speak up. And she thought about the 89 children who could hear now, who could see now, who could live without pain now, because someone had finally bothered to really look. Maisie's composition built to a crescendo joy and gratitude, and the overwhelming sensation of experiencing the world fully. Then it settled into something quieter, more contemplative, the music of someone who'd known silence and would never take sound for granted. The final note hung in the air, suspended perfect. Then the auditorium erupted, standing ovation, 200 bikers on their feet, tears streaming down weathered faces, applauding like their lives depended on it. Families crying, medical professionals witnessing the result of their failed systems being rebuilt. Journalists capturing proof that sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs came from the most unlikely places. Maisie took her bow, then gestured off stage, gestured to Bryn. "Miss Bryn, can you come out here, please?" Bryn shook her head. This wasn't her moment. This was Maisie's triumph. But Garrett stood up, turned to look backstage, and the expression on his face was a request impossible to deny. Bryn walked onto the stage, her legs shaking, overwhelmed by the attention and the emotion and the weight of everything this moment represented. Maisie handed Bryn the microphone. "4 years ago, I was deaf," Maisie said, signing as she spoke. "Old habits, beautiful habits. 26 doctors told my dad nothing could be done. But one waitress refused to accept that. She watched me, really watched me, documented patterns no one else noticed, trusted her observations over everyone else's credentials, and she gave me everything." The little girl, not so little anymore, wrapped her arms around Bryn. "You gave me music," Maisie whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "You gave me my dad's voice. You gave me the world. And you taught me that the most important thing anyone can do is see people, really see them. Not just look, see." Garrett joined them on stage, Knox right behind. Your Whitmore came up from the audience. Mama Rose, the families from the Second Listen program. They formed a circle around Bryn and Maisie, this community built on the simple, radical idea that observation mattered. Garrett took the microphone. "4 years ago, I was broken," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. "My daughter suffered. The system failed us. But one woman trusted her eyes over credentials, trusted observation over authority, trusted herself when nobody else did." He looked at Bryn, and the gratitude in his eyes was something that would sustain her through every hard day ahead. "Bryn didn't just save my daughter," Garrett continued. "She saved me. She honored my wife Isabel's memory by refusing to accept that suffering was inevitable. She honored her own mother Corinne by trusting the observation skills she'd been taught. And she saved 89 other families by proving that watching, really watching, matters more than any degree." He turned to address the full audience. "My wife Isabel used to say, the answer's always there. We just have to be brave enough to see it. Bryn was brave, She saw what others missed. She spoke up when others stayed silent. And she changed everything because she refused to let fear keep her from trusting her own eyes. The auditorium erupted again. Applause that felt like vindication, like validation, like proof that sometimes one person really could change the system by refusing to accept its failures. Bryn stood on that stage, surrounded by the community she'd built through observation and courage and stubborn refusal to stay silent. She thought about her mother's last words. Trust your eyes, Bryn. When you see something, say something. She'd done exactly that, and in doing so, she'd proven that observation wasn't a soft skill. It was the foundation of everything. The starting point for healing. The difference between suffering and relief, between silence and sound, between acceptance and transformation. The reception after the concert was chaos. Families wanted to meet her. Medical professionals wanted to discuss methodology. Journalists wanted interviews. The Steel Brotherhood wanted to celebrate. It was overwhelming and wonderful and exhausting. But the moment Bryn would remember most came later, when the auditorium had mostly cleared. She stood alone on the stage, looking out at the empty seats, processing everything that had happened. Garrett found her there. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Bryn said. "Just thinking about how far we've come. 4 years ago, I was just a waitress, afraid to trust herself. Now I'm standing on a stage being celebrated for doing it exactly what my mother taught me. It feels surreal." "It's not surreal," Garrett said. "It's earned. You didn't get here by luck or accident. You got here by being brave enough to speak up when you saw something wrong, by trusting your eyes when the world told you not to, by refusing to let the system's failures become permanent." He stood beside her, looking out at the empty auditorium. "Isabel would have liked you," he said quietly. "She spent 8 months trying to get doctors to take her seriously, spent 8 months documenting symptoms that got dismissed as anxiety and age. If someone like you had been observing her, she might still be here." His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. "I can't change the past. Can't bring back my wife. Can't give Maisie those 8 years of silence back. But because of you, other families don't have to suffer the way we did. Other mothers don't have to die because doctors won't listen. Other children don't have to grow up in pain because specialists miss what's obvious to people who actually pay attention." He turned to face Bryn directly. "You honored both our mothers," Garrett said. "Isabel and Corinne. You proved their observations mattered, that their suffering wasn't meaningless, that the system that failed them could be changed. That's legacy, Bryn. That's what matters. Not the degrees or the credentials or the publications, the legacy of people who see what others miss." Bryn's eyes burned with tears. "Thank you," she managed, "for trusting me when I didn't trust myself, for giving me the means to go back to school, for building this community around the idea that observation matters. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yeah, you could have," Garrett said. "You just would have taken longer, but we're family now, and family lifts each other up, makes each other better, protects each other when the world pushes back." He pulled out his phone and showed Bryn a photo. Maisie with her violin smiling broadly, the Austin Youth Orchestra logo behind her. "That smile," Garrett said, "that joy, that's because you saw what 26 specialists missed, because you were brave enough to speak up, because you trusted yourself when everyone else told you not to." He put the phone away and met Bryn's eyes. "Never forget that. Never let anyone tell you that observation is less valuable than credentials, that seeing is less important than testing. That attention is a soft skill beneath the dignity of real medicine. You proved them all wrong, and you're going to keep proving them wrong for the rest of your career." They stood together in the quiet auditorium, this unlikely family bound by observation and courage, and the shared understanding that sometimes the most important thing you could do was pay attention when everyone else looked away. Later, much later, Bryn sat in her apartment with her mother's notebook open on the table. She'd filled 3 more notebooks since that morning in the diner 4 years ago. Hundreds of observations, dozens of cases, 89 success stories. But this original notebook still mattered most because it represented the beginning, the moment she'd finally trusted herself, the moment she'd spoken up despite her fear, the moment everything changed because she refused to stay silent. She opened to a blank page and began documenting the concert, Maisie's performance, the community's response, the weight of validation and the responsibility it brought. Every detail recorded with the precision her mother had taught her. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote what had become her personal mantra: when you see something, say something. Trust your eyes. Observation matters more than credentials. Attention is not a soft skill, it's the foundation of everything. Never stop watching. Never stop seeing. Never let fear keep you from speaking up when something's wrong. She signed it with the date and closed the notebook. Tomorrow she'd see 6 patients at the clinic. She'd observe, document, look for patterns others might miss. She'd trust her eyes and speak up when she saw something wrong. She'd honor her mother's legacy and Isabel's memory in Maisie's 8 years of silence by refusing to let the system's failures become permanent. Because that's what observers did. They watched, they documented, they spoke up, and they changed everything one careful observation at a time. Bryn looked at the steel Brotherhood vest hanging in her closet. She who sees embroidered on the back. A reminder that seeing wasn't passive. It was active, engaged, courageous. And sometimes it was the most important thing you could do. She turned off the light and went to bed already mentally preparing for tomorrow's cases. Already watching, already seeing, already refusing to accept that credentials mattered more than observation, that degrees mattered more than attention, that the system's failures had to be permanent. Because she'd learned something fundamental that morning in Mama Rose's diner 4 years ago. Sometimes the answer was simple. Sometimes it was right there, visible to anyone who bothered to really look. Sometimes all it took was one person brave enough to trust their eyes, to speak up despite their fear, to refuse to stay silent when they saw something wrong. Sometimes all it took was someone willing to see. And Bryn Holloway would never stop seeing, never stop watching, never stop paying attention to the patterns others missed. Because that's what observers did. They changed the world by refusing to look away. One careful observation at a time.